Hi, this is Cheryl from the Cut at Home design team. Today I have a fun technique for you. I'm doing watercolor stamping. As you know, watercolor is just all the rage right now, and watercolor stamping is so much easier than you would believe. So here's a sample card using a Tim Holtz stamp set. The next two use Heartfelt Creations stamp sets. Here I got my bright on a little bit and created the bright butterfly, and then finally the botanical rose. Again, very, very pretty, super easy to do. Let me show you those techniques. I have to start with a disclaimer. I'm not the world's best at them, but I think with practice I'll be much better. My other disclaimer, it's kind of addicting. So there's a couple of different techniques that you can use. I want to show you both, but first let me show you what we're using here today is watercolor paper. It comes in a couple of different forms. The best that's on the market today is, as I understand it, I haven't really checked around, is the Distress watercolor cardstock. It comes pre-cut 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. You can see it's very thick watercolor cardstock. You do want to use a watercolor cardstock instead of a plain one. These handle the water so much better, and you're gonna have to get some water out here. So this is a very thick paper. What I tend to do is to just buy artist pads. This is a watercolor pad that's about, I think 9 by 11, and I chop it down for use, particularly while I'm practicing. I don't want to waste the good stuff. I'm sure, as you can imagine, the Ranger is quite expensive. So in terms of thickness, mine is very thin versus the very thick Ranger. So it's definitely a more quality product, but I'm not sure 100% it's a necessity. So let me show you with my paper. You're gonna need a couple of things. First of all, you're gonna need a water source nearby. This is just a little palette cup that you can buy at any artist supply store. A little cup with water in it, whatever you have will work just fine for this process. You just want to have some clean, fresh water sitting by your side. You're also going to need at least one watercolor brush, and probably several. They don't have to be the best brushes in the world. I suggest you find some with these little tip protectors on them, because that way you can protect the points of your brush. You will use those quite a bit. This is size 2, the smaller one, and size 4. They're good sizes to start with. I mostly use size 2, the smaller brush. You'll see that much more. And then this is a wash brush. This is a 1/2 inch wash. It's just got that flat, nice, even surface that you use for certain projects as well. So you need at least a couple of brushes. The Crayola ones that the kids have been using, probably not your best choice because they're really not made artist quality, and I'm not a big person for artist quality, but you have to have a certain quality to avoid problems. So I'm going to show you first how I did the flower here. We start out with the stamp. Again, this is from the Tim Holtz Flower Garden set. It's got quite a few really pretty flowers in it and stems. I pulled this one out. This one gives me this sort of cone flower. I'm not sure exactly what that is. And with that, I'm going to use some distress markers. So the distress markers are going to be the source of my watercolor, at least starting out. I've got 2 purples, a gold, and sort of a brown color for in the center. So I'm going to take the darkest of the purples, and I'm going to color it right onto the stamp here where I've got the petals. I want to make sure I've got good coverage, so you can color fast with some things. This one's just a little bit harder to color fast with because it's all broken up. Okay, so there I've got my petals colored in with the darkest purple. This is Seedless Preserves. Now I'm going to grab my gold color and go for the flower center here. Again, I'm working with the brush tip side of the markers. So I'll go ahead and color that in. Again, it's got some pretty fine detail, so you can hear that marker, you know, sort of resisting a little bit against the tip. If you end up mixing your colors a little bit, it's really all right. I just try and make sure that my tip is clean before I put it away so that it doesn't have any of the purple on. And so I'm ready to stamp now. So this is watercolor stamping. As you know, with the distress markers, if you're in a drier environment or something else, you first want to huff on the stamp, excuse me, to reactivate the moisture in those distress markers. An alternative would be to use a spray bottle, but I find that's too much water. So pardon me while I huff for a minute. Now I'm ready to stamp it down on the paper. And I'm just going to do a good firm stamp and leave it sit there for a minute to allow that ink to transfer. That's always a good thing, no matter what you're stamping. When I lift it up, you can see that I've got the gold from the center and I've got the purple of the leaves. Now, to make those start to come alive in a watercolor manner is just super, super easy. I'm trying to clear myself here a little bit more workspace. So here I go. I've got my number 2 round brush. I'm going to start working from the center. I want to pick up some water with that brush, but not too much. You can sort of wipe it off on your hand, whatever else is necessary. And then you begin to go around those areas that are stamped. And you can see that ink start to fuzz right away. So it will start to fuzz. You can pull it in, pull in that detail. If I continue around the top here, that will fairly well fill in for me. Again, I don't want to spend too much time showing you the same thing on video. But now when I'm ready to add some accent color, I grabbed my brushed corduroy for some accent color. Now, the palettes that you use for this is really just your acrylic block. So I'm going to move the stamp to the side and use my acrylic block here. First thing I'm going to do is scribble some of my brushed corduroy on. Oh, look at how green it looks. That's kind of funny. So once again, I'm going to pick up a little water, drop some of that off on my hand, and then I'm going to go pick up color on the palette, and I can begin to add that in here. Probably more at the base, a little more around the sides. The thing you need to know about watercolors is they do dry a lot lighter than what you see here, so don't be afraid of the color that you're seeing that comes to life. We'll let that dry for a minute while I show you what I did on the leaves or on the petals. So same sort of thing. I'm going to approach the petals one by one. I've got quite a bit of water on my brush here, so there's a lot to spread around. Again, it will pick up ink from that distress marker and it will begin to lift it. So you always want to make sure you have a paper towel around so that you can blot up if there's too much. I don't want it to blend the lines so much. I just want it to give me the nice blur and to add some purple coloring there. So I'm going to continue to work through all my leaves here. Again, I'm picking up some color from the dark that we've stamped on. We're going to add a little bit more color as desired here. It can either be through adding more of this dark purple, the seedless preserves, or we can add a lighter color in, which is what I did on the original project. So you're just slowly and carefully going through. You can see why your brush tip needs to stay intact for this. I've really got too much water there, so it's become more of a mess than anything. But let me put a little shaded lilac on my palette here, and we'll begin to pick that up and work that in as well. It's a very different color from seedless preserves, and so you see it show up. You can also pick some of the water back up off your hands as opposed to going back to the water well, and that keeps it from being so much. And you can begin to add these other colors in. Again, it needs to be a slow process. It's not tedious. I find it really fun and relaxing to do, but you need to work at it slowly to get the nice result. You can see I'm getting a much nicer result, or I've gotten a much nicer result on this flower than I am here, where I'm rushing and I've got too much water on, so everything's spreading out on me. Let me start here in another area and see if I can do better for you. Let's start over on the other side of the card. So again, make sure you take a lot of the water off. Sometimes it makes sense to just, with the plain water, go over the area to be colored, and that will help define the area that needs ink. Again, slow, but not terribly slow. You see some progress with this. It's not terrible. Again, control your water. You don't want too much. I do think you could use one of the water brushes, the aqua brushes, but it has to be one that you know you can control the flow of water with. That's why I've chosen to just use the plain old brush method, because I can tell much better how much water is there and try and prevent it from building up too much. Now, as before, I can go over to my palette and pick up some of the other color and begin to work that in for a little contrast and some depth. Isn't it cool when you don't really need new supplies to do a fun technique like this? You certainly could use watercolors for this, but why, when you can do all of this with your stamps and with just having a paintbrush? It's so easy. Your distress markers work great. For those of you who have them, the Spectrum Aqua markers, these are made by the people that make Spectrum Noir. These also work perfectly in giving you the same fun watercolor look here. Again, super easy. Now, I did something slightly different when I did my butterfly here. Here I used a no-line technique. The no-line technique involves stamping the image, and so I stamped, I'm just talking about the butterfly here on top. I stamped this image in a very light gray ink and watercolored from there. You want it dark enough so that you can see the lines to stamp, but ultimately you don't want those lines to show. Mine still do show through a little bit, but I think it gives a really cool effect for my butterfly. So I'm kind of happy with the result. So let me show you that technique as well. Again, I'm starting off with my watercolor paper. Watercolor paper, again, too, some of it is very rough texture and some has a very fine texture. I've got the fine textured watercolor paper. Anytime you're stamping, it's kind of hard to get a good solid image on that nubby stuff, but there are times when you want to use it. The Ranger Tim Holtz watercolor paper, for example, is double-sided. One side is smooth and the other side is dark. So here I have some VersaFine ink. This is smoky gray. It's a light gray ink, but it's a little too dark for me for what I want to do in this project. So the first thing I'm going to do is stamp it off, and then I'm going to come to my watercolor paper and get that second image from it. It will be much lighter. Now, a lot of people use the Ranger Tim Holtz antique linen. I don't use that so much because I'm afraid it's going to bleed on me. This VersaFine will not once it's dry. So again, this is smoky gray VersaFine. It doesn't tend to be one of those bleeding inks, but you do need to make sure that it gets dry for you before you get started. But you'll use the same process as I did with the other. First thing I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take my brush. the small one. Some people would be more confident using the big one, but I'm not. I took my small brush and I just went all around with clear water. And that helps to define the area that's going to get some watercolor. So all the way around it, we're going to sort of pre-moisten it. Now when I go back with my color, I don't need quite so much water. That helps me to keep my colors more vivid. You can see that the colors stayed a little bit more vivid here on the butterfly than they did in the background. And that's primarily because I was able to use a lot less water with it. And so it's just a matter of starting from wherever you want to start. I actually started in the center with the gold color, then put my squeezed lemonade right around the outside. The new cracked pistachio beyond that is sort of this greenish color. Went into peacock feathers. Oh gosh, this is worn lipstick. And then on the very edge is fresh picked raspberry. So all of those, because I've pre-wet my project, they begin to melt and bleed into one another. If they're not doing that enough, if they're not merging well, you can add a little more water, and that will help to carry the ink and to smudge it a little bit. When I was done, I went back and added a little detail. I added some more gold here at the side to give my body more definition. So I just darkened that up a little bit. So it's an easy process regardless of the colors you pick. Super, super easy. You've got your guidelines. You know exactly what you're dealing with to maintain that. So you can use this method with any stamp as well. Sometimes people call it the no-line method because, again, when it's done, it doesn't look like a pre-stamped image. It kind of looks like a watercolored image that you threw on there. Super, super easy things to do. Again, you can do this. You just need to grab yourself a paintbrush, a little bit of water, and your watercolor markers. And it's a super, super fun technique. Just practice a little bit and you'll be working at it like a pro. You amaze yourself with what you can watercolor. Again, it's an easy project to do. For my flower here, I just added the stem and used similar techniques, 2 different greens to bring that stem out. For my butterfly, I created the background just by taking a square of the paper and washing all over it with water and then dropping the ink in where I felt it made sense, allowing it to blend together. You can see there's a lot of blending. Again, keeping in mind that when it dries, it's going to dry so much lighter. My last image, the botanical rose, I did similar to the Tim Holtz flower. I used my inks to stamp it. Again, it's a much bigger image. So you have to move quickly with the markers and make sure that you get that ink re-moistened so that it transfers off. Then it's a matter of layering and coloring. I only had my darkest colors in. Actually, I had my medium color in when I stamped it, and I added a light and a dark to add some dimension to the flower itself. The same thing with the center. I added a lot with that to make it stand out. The leaves, pretty easy. I stamped them in one color and just accented them with another. So there's no magic to right colors or wrong colors. Grab what you have, grab a stamp, have fun with this technique. Thanks for watching. Bye.